Professor, as far as India is concerned, Pfizer and Moderna and other vaccines are not right now. There are only the two vaccines which are being administered. One from Bharat Biotech, which is Covaxin, and the other is from Serum Institute, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Covishield. For these two vaccines, companies have put out the fact sheet. What is it that you read into still the concerns? What are the main concerns?
So I think we should be worried. If we had to worry about vaccines at all, we would worry about, is the vaccine working? Is the vaccine safe? Now, in terms of, is the vaccine working? For the AstraZeneca serum vaccine, we borrow data from the studies that have been done in the West that were used by the MHRA, the regulatory agency in the UK, to approve their vaccine, that is going to be reviewed by the EMA shortly. So from their studies, we know that the vaccine is safe, it's immunogenic, and it is working to prevent disease. That data is a little bit messy because we have different doses, we have different intervals at which the doses were given. But at a minimum, we have clinical efficacy data for every dosing schedule and for every dose that has been used. So we know that the vaccine is working in humans. We will need to understand, by following up people, how well the vaccine is working. For the other Indian vaccine, which is Covaxin, we have data on phase 1 and phase 2, about 800 people, showing that the vaccine is safe. The vaccine is now in phase 3 studies, a very nice design for evaluating clinical efficacy. They finished recruiting almost 26,000 people. So over 10,000 people have gotten the vaccine. And so far, no safety signals. Many people have now gotten their second dose of the vaccine. Again, no safety signals coming from the vaccine. So in terms of the efficacy and safety trials, the safety is known. But the efficacy, we don't have that data yet for Covaxin. We have data from the animal studies. They've done challenge studies. They've shown that the vaccine works in animals to protect against disease. We are awaiting that data from humans.
Okay. For our viewers, understanding the three terms which is often being used these days is one is immunogenicity, which is the amount of antibodies that a vaccine is able to generate in the body. The second is around safety, which is essentially how much of to the extent to which it is generating allergies and reactions within the body. And third is about efficacy, which I think which is essentially the protection that the vaccine gives when a person after taking vaccination actually is exposed to the virus. If I've got that right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, doctor, what happens if they miss out on the second dose? Say if a doctor is not well or is traveling or not in town, which is unlikely, but just in case is not well or something. So what if they miss out? Can they take it a little later, 6 months down the road, second dose?
Absolutely. So in fact, the vaccines that we are using now are currently both 2-dose vaccines. So if for any reason the second dose is missed, it should be taken whenever it is possible to take that second dose. The purpose of having the 2 doses is really to ensure that you get the maximum protection that these products can give. There are other vaccines that are being developed, which will be single dose products. But at the moment, both these products have their maximum benefit when they are given in the form of 2 doses.
Okay. Which is the single dose vaccine that you're referring to, doctor?
Johnson & Johnson, Janssen Vaccines is making the single dose product. Their vaccine is currently in phase 3 trials, testing to see whether it prevents disease or not. We should have those results in the next few weeks. And if that is a vaccine that is shown to be efficacious, then in India, Biological E has an agreement to manufacture that vaccine here. So that may happen by the towards the latter part of this year.
Yeah, doctor. The other vaccine which is being talked about is the nasal vaccine, which Bharat Biotech is working on. How effective will that be, and what is it? There's a lot being talked about this vaccine.
I think people worry about injections being given. And the idea of a nasal vaccine is that it might be an easier delivery mechanism. We have had nasal vaccines before. We have for influenza, for example. But in some seasons, the nasal vaccine does not work as well as the inactivated vaccine. And there have been examples of where nasal vaccines have not succeeded. For example, WHO did a large trial to look at whether a measles vaccine could be made into a nasal approach, and that trial did not work. The vaccine worked, but it did not work as well as the injectable vaccine. So that approach was dropped. So when we think about nasal vaccines, it sounds very exciting, but ultimately you'll have to wait to test that vaccine for clinical efficacy and then make up your mind about whether it's as good or better.
Who should not be taking the current two vaccines which are now being talked about?
So, in terms of the fact sheets that have been put out, we are told that pregnant women and children should not be taking the vaccine. So, pregnant and lactating women, because the vaccine has not been evaluated in them, children also, because the vaccine has not been evaluated in them. But very few vaccines are actually evaluated in pregnant women. So does this mean we will exclude pregnant women forever? If you look at the guidance from the FDA in the US, they recommend that the vaccine may be taken if the person is somebody who is at high risk of exposure. So, for example, many healthcare staff are women in the reproductive age, and they might want to take the vaccine because they have high levels of exposure to SARS-CoV-2. So in the US, it is feasible. In India, given our guidance, it is not currently feasible to give that vaccine. In addition to that, there are some medical indications, people who have certain kinds of conditions that have been put out onto the fact sheets, people who are immunocompromised, for example. And again, this is a population that you want to protect. If somebody has cancer and is on chemotherapy, somebody has had a transplant, is it right for them to get vaccine or not? At the moment, because these vaccines are in restricted use, those groups are not advised to get immunized. But when full licensure comes, these recommendations may change.
Doctor, and also given the concerns, given the kind of fact sheet parameters like dizziness, giddiness, and all, how safe is it for the elderly with comorbidities? These two vaccines.
The vaccines that we have in India today, we have not seen a lot of data on the elderly. So, whereas with Pfizer and Moderna, we know that the vaccines worked to prevent severe disease, and in fact, the prioritization framework in the UK has been around vaccinating preferentially as a priority group people who live in nursing homes, because that's where the mortality is also the greatest. For Covishield, there was very little data that was available in the elderly, even though it is now being gathered. And for Covaxin, we don't have clinical data other than to say that in the people that were included in the phase 2 trial, the vaccine was immunogenic. So based on what was seen with the mRNA vaccines, which is a completely different platform from what we have currently in India today, it's likely that these vaccines will protect, but the elderly are in the group that comes after healthcare workers and essential workers in the government's prioritization framework. And by then, hopefully, We will have data from the AstraZeneca study that can be applied to Covishield, and we will have data from Covaxin that we will also be able to use.
That's by July this year, actually.
I hope that it will be earlier than that.
Okay. But doctor, the elderly, if you're reading the news reports, like for example, in Pfizer cases in Norway and others, essentially there are the elderly who actually those cases are there of elderly actually, whether it's casualties or others. So
I
are there
don't think
concerns?
I don't think we should be too concerned about them. I think one of the things that's important to remember is that the Norwegian Public Health Agency themselves put out that they have a very high threshold for reporting. Everything gets reported, right? Now, when you report something that happens and ascribing causality to the vaccine, those are two separate things. And if you look at how many elderly people there are in Norway, how many deaths are expected to occur every day, do you anticipate that this number is above what would normally be expected? My understanding is that the Norwegian authorities have said that this is within the number that they would expect to see. They will nonetheless, I'm sure, continue to monitor the situation. But currently, I think one thing that is very important for everybody to understand is because if two things are related in time, I got the vaccine today and I fell down the stairs the next day, those two may not be related. Similarly, I got the vaccine today. I had a heart attack the next day. Those two may not be related. If you look at a large number of people, if you follow 50,000 people for 1 week after vaccination, some of them are going to have health related events. There will be strokes, there will be heart attacks. They will not necessarily be related to the vaccine or caused by the vaccine, even though they are related in time. So, very important to understand that. And in fact, I'm quite encouraged by the immense reporting that is going on in the media about the rollout. Every day we hear about the adverse events. Now, these are mostly minor events that are happening, and it just shows me that our adverse event surveillance system is working really, really well because these cases are being detected, they are being managed, and the data are being reported.
Doctor, the issues around also the point that this fact sheet put out by the two companies, every vaccine that is delivered always comes with a with caution, advisory note and a caution. In to what extent is it par for the course in these two vaccines, or what is standing out about these vaccines? Are these routine like statutory warnings along with cigarettes and alcohol that is mentioned? Is it similar to that, or is there something additional that has happened this time?
Absolutely similar to other vaccines. There is nothing new about this process. Every vaccine carries a list of indications. Every drug, in fact, carries a list of indications and contraindications. So, this is really nothing special. If you go to the WHO website, there are actually vaccine safety data sheets for every kind of vaccine that summarize all the information on all the vaccines. That's been there forever. And this is nothing that is out of the ordinary.
Okay. Last question, Professor. When this is now moved from emergency use authorization to general use authorization, whenever that happens, to these two vaccines, what additional, the common man, what is it that they need to be careful about?
Nothing more than we are doing at the moment. So I assume that when the study data from the phase 3 studies for Covishield, for Covaxin are submitted to the National Regulatory Authority, the DCGI, they should get full licensure. if the data are supportive of that. And there's no reason why the data should not be supportive of that.
Okay.
When they have that full licensure, then they will get a marketing authorization that allows them to distribute these vaccines much more widely. And it's likely that the restrictions on these vaccines will be informed by the experience not only during the trials, but also during the rollout that is currently happening.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for your time. I hope it clarifies some of the doubts that people have. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.